Alright, we're going to do another tomato review today on this tomato right here, and it's called the 67 Jährige Tomate aus Babelsberg. Now, I don't know that much about this tomato offhand. I will have information in the description of it, but if I remember correctly, this tomato was basically rediscovered, if you will, and they got the seed from a germplasm, I think, in Germany, and they were an old seed variety. They got the request granted to them. They got the seed and they grew it out, and this is what came out of it. And this is the name of it: 67 Jährige Tomate aus Babelsberg, however you say that in German. I don't know. But that's it. That's a tomato. Let me give you a better view as to what the inside looks like. Hopefully you can see that. Can't tell if it's blurry or not. The camera's old, guys. It's time for a new camera. Don't ever buy a Sony. You only buy Canon. Do not buy Sony. Trust me on that one. And here's a look at the tomato. And you can see it's this beautiful sunset orange color. And they get around this size. So far, all the tomatoes I've been getting haven't been too much bigger than what you see right here. So that's about the size that they get, which is basically like a supermarket tomato, like the ones you get in the plastic. They're usually like they're not really a large slicer. They're not even a medium slicer. They're like a small slicer. They come in those little bricks. You ever see them? They're like 3 in a package or in a plastic little tray, and there's 3 tomatoes in there. Those smaller type of slicer tomatoes. That's about the size of what this is. So let's do a bricks on this and see what it tastes like. It looks like a dry tomato to me, to be honest. But that could be because these tomatoes have been sitting out for about a week. I just don't have time to get to the tomatoes to review them. I just have to pick them, get them off the plant before the birds blast holes in them. And then when I get time, I try to do these tomato reviews. I just don't have any time, working and everything else. So let's see what it says. That's a low one. It's 4 in the bricks. Ain't too impressed with that, but that doesn't surprise me because just looking at the tomato, you can see the seeds ain't fully attached around the rind. Usually that's associated with the flower not fully pollinating for whatever reason. It could be just it got some of the pollen, it created the fruit, but it just the flower just didn't totally pollinate. And it could be sometimes that's associated with the variety of tomato. So sometimes tomatoes, no matter how well it's being pollinated, say by itself or even by an insect or a bee or something, it just generally the flower doesn't pollinate very well. It has trouble fully pollinating, so you'll get a lot of hollowing around the tomato. So it's not a hollow tomato per se, though if you look at it, you can kind of see that the seeds aren't attached to the rind. And so, I'm not sure where you are right now on the camera, but you can see that they're not attached to the rind. So generally when you see that, that tells me that it's going to be kind of maybe a dry or a chalky tomato. It shouldn't be because he's been sitting out for a long enough period of time, but it could be. So I'm prepared to deal with that if it is. So let's give it a go. Very interesting. First of all, it wasn't dry and it wasn't chalky. That totally threw me off. It has a really rich tomato flavor, and it has a really good tangy flavor. Sweetness was a little on the low side, but in this particular case, I really don't want too much sweetness with this type of tomato. The flavor of the tomato is very hard to describe. The only way I can really relay it to you is that the flavor was very pronounced. The tomato flavor itself is extremely pronounced, and when you eat that tomato, you can really pick up the accents of the tomato flavor itself. There's really no way I can actually say, it's hard to say, what type of tomato flavor it is. It's a rich tomato flavor. It's really hard to describe because I eat so many different varieties of tomatoes. It's really hard for me to start to categorize, this type of tomato flavor and that. We're talking about flavors, not sweetness, not tangy, not tardy, not watery. We're talking about the actual flavor itself. That's the part that resonates on the back of your tongue and the very sides of the back of the tongue. That's the flavor range. That's the flavor zone for tomatoes. And you really want to activate that part of your tongue when you're eating tomatoes. That's what really brings out really good dishes that are made with tomatoes. Really good sauces, really good dishes that are generally used tomato to make, even like tomato soups, for example. You really want a certain type of a tomato flavor itself, the flavor of that tomato. And that part really needs to activate that in the back of your tongue to really drive home the value of that tomato, the intensity of the tomato. It's not always about sweetness and tanginess. I really should try to emphasize that a little more. But that's very, very important when you're really trying to grab the right kind of flavor and sensation when let's say you're a chef and you're cooking and you're trying to grab that sensation and incorporate that into your dish so you can transcend that to your to the people that are eating your dish, your customers or your guests. You want to transcend that to them, and the way you do that is by knowing how to select the tomato that's going to fit your dish best. And so hopefully this will help guide you in that area. But even though it didn't have a lot of sweetness on it, that tangy part and the richness of the tomato flavor was very, very interesting. It's very exciting. It literally lit my tongue up like you lighten up like you turned a switch on. Bing! It's like immediately I was like, wow, that tomato flavor hit that spot. It's like it hit the G spot, so to speak, with tomatoes. I literally hit that spot with it, and it was like, wow, that was like literally, I was just like almost, going to another planet almost, because I strive for that in the tomato. If the tomato doesn't have that, you're generally, even if it's really sweet and it's really nice and tangy and the balance is good, if it doesn't have that rich tomato flavor that's going to carry through on the back part of your tongue, if I can't get that, it's like having a dry one, you're just shooting blanks. And it's what it's like. It's just an offset feeling. You're not satisfied, so to speak. And so I really look for that real tomato flavor more than anything. Everything else has its own place too. The sweetness, the tanginess, that's important. But I'm really emphasizing a lot more on the tanginess because as I start to develop more and more dishes as I cook, I'm realizing that even more important than the tangy and the sweet. The tangy and the sweet's really good for when you're eating them raw. But if you're going to be eating them in cooking, you really got to focus on the tomato flavor part of it because that's what's going to carry that dish. That flavor is what really stays with the cooking process. If you're making sauce with it of any kind, it's staying with that cooking process. If you're slicing it up and you're putting it on bread and then putting it in a toaster oven, that flavor it's the flavor of the tomato that needs to transcend into that dish and that sandwich, not the sweetness and tanginess. Because as soon as you start to heat up a tomato, it blends in. It all starts to infuse. The flavors literally infuse. I'll eat this last piece and we'll end this review. But it's really a very nice tomato, is what I'm trying to say. It's not super high in the sweetness, but it really carries its own. I'm going to be honest with you. Now, I did squeeze the seed from that. So the seeds is really what's carrying the tomato flavor. You really need that gel from the seeds. If you take the gel and the seeds out of it, you're really ending up with a real bland center mass is what you end up with. You really need those seeds and that gel. And so this one I took the seeds out of the top of it to really get an idea on the flavor of the flesh part of it. The flavor of flesh is generally pretty neutral, but it does have a little bit of that tang to it too. So you can get that effect as well, even if you did remove the seeds. My recommendation to you is to not remove the seeds and to generally keep everything intact when you're making your dishes, especially tomato sauce. If you're going to make tomato sauces, you really want to keep it all together. But in my opinion, if I was to give this a rating as far as the flavor and the way now it's not the best producer of tomatoes. It could just be that I started getting blight early and the birds are really hacking up my tomatoes good this year. I would say it's a pretty good producer. You're going to get maybe 2 dozen of this. You'll get like maybe 3 or 4 bracts that have like maybe 4 or 5 tomatoes on each bract. You'll get like 3 or 4 of those right out the gate. If you can keep the tomato plant alive to the end of the year without getting blight or attacked by animals and stuff like that, you'll probably get a lot more than that. If you just need to keep the plant alive all the way coming into the colder months, because that's when the tomato plants really start to fire up, knowing that it's the end of the year. They really start to fire up and they really start to put out the flowers and the fruit. This time of the year, I mean, we've been running pretty much 90 plus every single day since June. I haven't seen a break, maybe once or twice. I've seen a couple of cloudy days that were below that, but in general, it's been 90 and above, and that's stressful on the tomato plants, and they're dropping the flowers, they're dropping the fruits, birds are attacking the fruits. It's just a really harsh summer for tomatoes this year, so I can't really expect a whole lot of performance out of the tomatoes this year. But as far as the flavor goes, this is a really good tomato, guys. This is a very, very delicious tomato. I really like this one. As you can see, this is all cracking. We had gotten a monsoon type rain where it dumped maybe 2 inches of rain, and that's a lot of rain for this area. And because of that 2 inches of dumping of rain, a lot of my tomatoes split. So I did lose some tomatoes just by the splits alone, because they split and then they get the black stachybotrys in the crack, and then once that happens, that's the end of that tomato. It starts to rot right there. So it did split a few of those tomatoes on me because of the rain, and these did split. I can't really say relatively easy, but they did split, so you're going to get scarring on a tomato like that. So that's not a big deal. You could actually just cut that off or eat it. As long as if you don't see like black inside of here or white fuzz coming out of it, then you're good. If you see black or white fuzz, you know, cut that part off. You don't want to eat it. The tomato isn't bad. It's just a crack got infected, you know, and it's not going to get you sick or anything. Just don't eat the stachybotrys and don't eat the white fungus that's growing out of the crack. If you don't do that, the rest of the tomato is perfectly fine. But this one doesn't have it because I picked them off the plant before that could happen. So as soon as they start turning a little ripe, I have to get them off the plant immediately because the birds will blast holes right through these tomatoes and they'll be all over the floor in my garden. So I have to pick them very quickly. As soon as I start to see them turn color, off they come. Now I let them ripen on a table for about 3 days. They'll be fully ripe like this. This is about a week, you know, maybe a week or so right here, and it's fully ripened. It's absolutely delicious, guys. Highly recommend this tomato. I will offer seed for this at the end of the year on hrseeds.com. That's it for your tomato review. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.